Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Stop Overthinking. I'm so glad you could join me today for this discussion on what does it mean to have perfectionistic tendencies? I coach a lot of women that are high achievers. They will describe themselves as type A personalities and having really high standards. Not many people will self-identify as being a perfectionist, and that's fine. I'm going to talk about these behaviors that you may notice that I'm going to say are perfectionistic behaviors. And it really doesn't matter how you identify them. It's more about how it shows up in your life and how you respond to some of these things that may be happening around you or within you. So I came about this topic organically this past summer as I was coaching 5 different clients at one time who were all really high achieving women and struggling with different aspects of perfectionism and how it was impacting their lives. And not one person came to me and said, like, hey, I'm a perfectionist. It was more about these patterns that would show up. And I noticed as I was coaching these women, and these are also skills and behaviors and thought patterns that I had been working through for a couple of years as well. So I don't know if I just naturally attracted women that were these high achievers, but that's where the focus and a lot of what I talk about as being this high achiever, being this perfectionist, and where it comes from. So here are some ways that perfectionism may show up in your life. And I'm not going to say that these are necessarily even negative things. It's a way to notice your patterns, your thoughts, how you feel about it, and ultimately how you decide to move forward. The other thing I'd like to note is that you may see these behaviors in certain aspects of your life, but not in others. And that's really common. So there are people who are so far on the perfectionism spectrum that this permeates their entire life in every aspect of their life. But it is a spectrum. So it might be something that you will notice more at work or maybe in certain relationships, whether that's a personal or romantic relationship or even a professional relationship. It may be with your parenting, or it could just be being really hard on yourself. So, in any case, it doesn't matter if it's one piece or many parts of your life. It's just something to start to notice. And one of the most common things that I see is where people are feeling like an imposter. We hear this imposter syndrome sort of thing all of the time. And this will come from feeling this need to be a certain way, that other people need to see you only in a certain light. And this often is going to keep you small, where you don't speak up, you don't share ideas, you're afraid of rejection and judgment and criticism, so that you are only showing people a certain aspect of yourself because you don't believe that they are going to think the same of you if they would see other aspects. A lot of this will come to your expectations, and it's how you have defined how you are supposed to behave. And this, if you go back to one of the previous episodes when I was talking about how things should be with the manual. So we will have a really strong manual for ourselves and the way that situations should be, the ways that we should act, the ways that we should show up. And if that is not in alignment, we're afraid that we're wrong. And so we don't want to show that piece to anybody. So it's these impossible high expectations of what we need to do, what we need to achieve, how we need to talk and act and behave and show up, and that nothing else is acceptable. And showing anything less than that to other people is essentially going to ostracize you. So much of perfectionism is a trauma response or at least a reaction to this need for validation and connection, and feeling like the only way that that's going to happen is if these very specific criteria and expectations are met. We're often looking for self-worth outside of ourselves when you're having that really high thing, that it only is about accomplishments. It's only about what you say. It's only about how other people interpret you. And there's this pressure to conform within that. And it goes back so often to the tribal mentality that we had thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, in terms of being accepted. And we needed these other people to take care of us, or we weren't going to survive. And so, as we have evolved in many ways, our brain hasn't always caught up. And in fact, society reinforces this conformity, this need that you need to behave a certain way. You have to be accepted for other people to be there for you. And so we hold these standards so high. A lot of people with perfectionistic tendencies are people pleasers. This overlaps. So people pleasers are not all perfectionists, but almost all people with perfectionistic tendencies are people pleasers because you can't be perfect if other people don't like you and accept you. So this is a really strong trait for those that are looking to other people, and that other people need to like you, to accept you, to be happy, and that the only way that you can be happy and comfortable is to get that validation and acceptance from other people. And I will do another podcast just on people pleasing because this is a huge topic as well, because it's an impossible standard. So many of these expectations about being a perfectionist are impossible to meet, and people pleasing is one of those because we cannot control other people's emotions. We don't get to control their thoughts. So it really becomes this game of manipulation that I'm going to bend and contort myself and do these certain things and act a certain way and say these things in order for you to think certain things about me. And the messed up piece of all of this is I have no idea really what you're thinking. I'm trying to read you and I'm still interpreting it. And this just feeds more into that imposter syndrome because it's all fake. You're acting a certain way, you're saying certain things to get people to respond a certain way so that you feel how you want to feel. So it's a vicious cycle. So again, look for a future episode where I will talk more about that people pleasing. But if you have strong people pleasing tendencies and some of these other ones that I'm talking about, then you may be struggling with some perfectionism as well. Other things that typically point to perfectionistic tendencies are this extreme need for control and wanting everything to go a certain way. And so it manifests in lots of different ways, but it might be being super organized and wanting and directing other people because then you feel like it's in control and that this is going to reflect back on you. It could be doing lots of research before taking action because you want to have all the ducks in a row and be able to feel this sense of controlling the outcome. You want to control, again, this perception of what other people are thinking of you and controlling this perception for yourself often as well. Like if I have everything lined up, that means I'm doing it right. If I have everything lined up, I have it together. I'm doing it right. I'm going to get a pat on the head. So, wanting things to be a certain way, being very organized and very controlling with behaviors, as well as trying to keep other people doing things the way you want them to, can also be a sign of perfectionistic tendencies. Another one is avoiding conflict. Because if somebody is mad at you or disappointed in you, then you're not perfect, right? So it goes along with the people pleasing, but you're, really looking to avoid any sense of discomfort or any negative emotion or a sense of negative emotion from another person because everybody has to like you and want to be with you and support you in order to fit into this ideal that the perfectionist has. Obsessive thinking is often a trademark for perfectionism as well, because you are so stuck in your head, constantly analyzing how is this going to be interpreted? How is this going to be construed? What if I did it this other way, and all of the variables that are going to go along with it. So you are not only analyzing the situation and your thoughts and feelings that go along with it, but how other people, what you think other people are going to think and feel as well. So your brain is on massive overload often because it is this desire to control the outcome, and the only way that you can do that is to constantly be thinking and thinking about how everything could change. Because when we're trying to get other people to think and feel a certain way about us, we know subconsciously that that's not possible, that their thoughts and feelings are dynamic and are going to change all the time. And so it is this constant cycle of, even if they said I did the right thing now, or even if I got an A on this paper, or this project succeeded, or my boss appreciated me, that's right now, and that could change at any moment. And so there is this overpowering need to constantly be thinking and analyzing and thinking and analyzing, because other people perceptions of you can and will change. So, along with all of that obsessive thinking, often comes indecision, because perfectionists are thinking that things are black and white. There is one right answer, there is one right way to do this. And so I'm going to think and think and think and think some more. And I might make a decision, but then I'm going to sit with it for a little while so that I can make sure that that feels good. I might ask for other people's opinions, but to commit and make a decision means that you're putting yourself out there and it might be wrong. And I'm saying wrong in air quotes. So this black and white thinking of this right and wrong will freeze high achievers, perfectionists in indecision, because it's committing to something that may not come out the way that you want it to. So that often indecision will often be tied to procrastination as well, because again, we're thinking, we're thinking, we're thinking, we're analyzing, we're trying to decide how this thing that I'm going to do is going to be considered by other people. So I might do more research, I might talk to people. So indecision and procrastination, not committing to things because I don't want to cause conflict. I don't want to run into discomfort. I don't want people to think negatively of me. I don't want to feel like a failure. And you can see how all of these will just keep feeding off of each other to create a bigger and bigger mess of sorts. Perfectionists are often rigidly disciplined. And this kind of goes with the control as well. And in this case, I'm talking about yourself. And so again, this may not be every aspect of your life. It might be one part of your life. It could be diet or food or exercise or body image, because you feel like everything else is out of control. So I'm going to control this one thing. It could be that you have very set, we talked about organizational skills or habits, and you don't like change because that feels out of control. So being very disciplined, having certain habits, doing things in a certain order is often very common. And we're doing this self-discipline, thinking subconsciously often that when it's this rigid, you get to control what you are putting forward and you don't appear to have any flaws. Perfectionists will have these high internal standards that you may or may not be aware of. And these standards again, it can be how you look, how you dress, how you parent, how you show up at work. It might be your body image, how you exercise, speaking in groups. But there are these standards and expectations that are so strong of how things should be, and the desire to conform to those standards, because that is how you will be loved and accepted and validated and feel connection, is tied together erroneously, but yet tied together. So, perfectionism may have developed at different points in your life. It is often reinforced as we start going through puberty and that desire for conformity and wanting other people to like you. It is a desire to be wanted and accepted and connected, and feeling insecure with certain aspects of yourself. And also, again, having these really rigid beliefs about how things should be. And that's how you need to think and behave and show up in order for this love and connection and acceptance. And it often gets perpetuated, whether it's from childhood or puberty and adolescence into college. It's perpetuated in many work environments where you're afraid to say what you're really thinking, or to speak up when you think differently about a topic than someone else. So we see this often in our lives and in society. And while it's very common, it can also be really hurtful, because we are closing ourselves off to expansive thinking, to creativity, to other options. A lot of times we are denying our authentic thinking and feelings and pushing them down, that not trusting ourselves to be good enough for what we think other people want to see from us. And it can be a really difficult place to be when you are closing yourself off, holding yourself so tightly in control. Your brain is going all the time, only showing people a certain version of you, not taking risks because you can't control the outcome. And that also means not taking opportunities, whether that's in a relationship or a job or a course of study or just trying a new hobby, because you can't control the outcome. You can't control what that's going to look like. There's a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity when you are struggling with perfectionism. So I noticed this and started working on it in my life in a couple of different places. I would have said that I was a high achiever and couched it that way. It sounded nicer and, less negative for most of my life. Yep, I'm a high achiever. I push myself really hard. I have high standards. I'm a type A personality. I would have self-described in any of those ways. When I noticed, especially with my son, who's my oldest child, and as he was in a toddler and into preschool, and how rigid and in control he would want to be with things, and not there's ways that he would play, but there also became a point where I was noticing not wanting to try things and being so frustrated when something didn't go his way that he was done and he was never going to try it again. And I didn't make the connection initially, although he is very much my mini me, but starting to be able to see this, and I recognized, like, I need to show him how to make mistakes and how to recover from that. And as I started thinking about that, it was like, oh, holy crap, to make mistakes. It's one thing to be able to be building with blocks with a toddler and knock it down and say, oh, we can handle it. But for me to really make mistakes in my life, when I started internalizing that, really made me very anxious. And I started digging in and recognizing that, wow, I really am very rigid about this expectation that I have of myself, how I am supposed to be as at the time, a wife and a mother, and whether it was a teacher or the different aspects of my life, thinking that if I didn't do it quite right, because there was definitely a right and a wrong, that if I didn't do it right, I was going to be thought as less than. And I just couldn't even fathom feeling that way. It terrified me. Even though I was feeling that way, just by thinking about it, I thought I was somehow preventing it. So my journey of starting to be able to handle failure and rejection and making these other choices was unique for me in the sense that I figured out I need to be able to model this for my kids, and I need to figure out how to do this in my real life to not be telling them one thing but acting another way. And so I kind of fell down this rabbit hole myself of noticing a lot of these characteristics, a lot of this black and white thinking, very, very rigid beliefs of how things should be, how I needed to behave. And then of course, I projected that onto other people. So not only do I have these high standards for myself, but other people better meet up to these standards as well. I don't want to be necessarily around other people that are not going to appreciate and validate me, or that I'm going to feel pulled down into. So it's just a vicious cycle. But there's hope. And this is where the, coaching and therapy and different aspects were really able to help me check in. And I just want to explain a little difference here with coaching versus therapy. And at least my experience and in talking to others is therapy is going to get a lot into like, how did this happen? How did I get here? How did this develop from my childhood? A lot of the history and the past actions before it. Whereas coaching and how I work now myself and with clients is okay, so what? What are we going to do to move forward? It doesn't really matter where it came from. If it is a trauma response, it's great to have therapy to deal with that aspect. If you have already managed those and done some of that work, or it's not as severe, then it's just a matter of what am I going to do from here? How can I be intentional? How can I show up and learn to be authentic, to be able to hold that discomfort, to take off the mask, let people really see me, and to be okay with their reactions and my reactions. That's the scary work, is the managing the feelings of all this. So much of perfectionism, people pleasing, wanting control is holding so tightly onto how you want to feel. You want, again, to feel that love and acceptance and validation and connection. You tie it into your self worth and your value as a human. And while some of that might be misplaced, that's where our thinking goes. And so being able to do the work, to trust yourself, to put yourself out there without knowing the outcome, without being as dependent on what other people might think of you or how you are going to feel, can be really scary. And so that's why it's helpful to have a guide in this process, whether it's a coach or a therapist or a healer, whatever avenue works for you. I'm certainly available to help through this process. And some of the things that we do is we just start noticing how you talk to yourself. So, starting with this awareness, and I like to think of it as being a curious observer. How am I talking to myself? Is it critical? Is it judgmental? Is it like, the inner mean girl? Or is it compassionate and understanding? You can also notice how you view other people. Again, is it judgmental and critical and expectations of others? And especially if you are constantly disappointed, you just want to be aware of where that's coming from. Can people disappoint you? And are there people that aren't going to live up to your standards? Yes. But if this is a common theme with lots of people or certain aspects of your life, again, just be aware because it might be you. Another piece to recognize that as you are noticing how you view other people and if you are critical of other people is to recognize and wonder, is that a criticism you have about yourself? Is that a judgment you have about yourself? Is that a fear that you have about yourself? I hear this a lot from people, and they'll talk about somebody else being, really lazy and unmotivated, and checking in with your expectation. And is that because you underneath it are really concerned that somebody is going to think that you are lazy and unmotivated. So you are pushing yourself above and beyond constantly so that you're not thought of that way. Journaling, as always, can be really helpful to identify patterns and thoughts. So those are things that you can do on your own. Like, you know, what does it mean? What kind of expectations do I have of myself as a partner? What kind of expectations do I have of my partner? And just notice them. What kind of expectations do I have of myself at work and with people that you work with? How do you handle things when it doesn't go the way that you want? Is it blame and criticism and judgment of yourself or of others? Do you consider yourself to be a failure? That if a project doesn't go the way that you want it to, that it's not about the project failing, but about you failing? So, those are some key things to notice and to recognize. And also, you may have checked the box for a whole bunch of these. And that's where grace and compassion come in. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It just means this is the way that you're behaving right now. And the fabulous thing about coaching and rewiring your brain is you can change some of those stimulus and your response. You can be more intentional. You can think about things differently. And if it is holding you back and keeping you small, keeping you afraid, making choices out of fear, that you don't have to live like that anymore. Compassion and perfectionism generally don't coexist. So if you're having a really hard time, especially about feeling compassion for yourself when you make a mistake, when you don't want to do something, when it doesn't go your way, it can also be compassion for other people. It's just an opportunity to be aware, take a look at those expectations, and are they impossible standards? Because a whole bunch of perfectionism and its toxic cycle is because it's impossible. It's impossible to control other people. It's impossible to control what they think. It's impossible to control what they feel. It's impossible to manage the world and have everything go the way you want it to. It is impossible to not make mistakes. It's impossible to not fail sometimes. And trying to avoid all of those things is really holding you back in life. That you're staying so small, to not step out of the box, to not seem flawed in any way, shape, or form. And it's a really hard way to live. It is possible to quiet your brain. It is possible to slow down the thinking, to be able to logically make choices, to be able to handle how you feel when it doesn't have the outcome that you want it to have. So perfectionism and being this high achiever, people often think like, well, I'm pushing myself so hard and this is why I have succeeded in all of these things. And that's actually not true. You have succeeded in spite of all of these things because being that hard and judgmental and critical of yourself and rigid makes things more difficult in the long run. So if this resonates with you, please continue to follow along. Follow me on Instagram or Facebook or within the Facebook group. And we will be talking more about these things. And if you're at a point in your journey and you're ready to say, yeah, I recognize this about myself and I'm tired of living this way. I want to be able to do this differently. I would love to be your coach. I would love to help you. We can work one-on-one and create a program that is going to be what you need in the timeline and speed that you are willing to work and the changes that you want to make. So I will talk to you again next week. Thank you for being here and see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen O'Donnell. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss